So, we'll just start with, what position are you seeking on the executive election?
Currently I'm not seeking any position on the executive.
At all?
Yeah.
When you say currently, did you have plans in the past to? Are you still open to the idea of running for a position?
I am still open to a position. I don't see that likely to happen, and I have always been open to position before.
What position would you be open to?
I would have been interested in vice president.
Why would you be interested in vice president?
So the nature of the role of vice president is one that really interests me. It's one that I see as being very based on like more of a welfare aspect, kind of internal board management, feedback mechanisms, making sure that the board is functioning to its full capacity in a way that is as productive and efficient as possible. And I think that is what interests me most, in that I've seen over the last year that when the board is working at its peak, or when everyone is working to their full potential, the board achieves so much more in terms of its aims and its goals than when we are all like dysfunctional, or even when we're like working together but not working effectively.
Why do you think you're best suited for this kind of like pastoral care position, as you term it?
Just because it's what interests me, and I think I have good ideas for what the position entails, and how we can increase internal mechanisms to make us more effective.
Can you think of or detail some specific things you'd want to do with the VP position?
So one of the things I would have wanted to do is to implement feedback mechanisms within the board. So ways of first year or non-executive directors to provide feedback to the executive in things that they're doing right, things that they're doing wrong, ways they can improve their jobs, ways that they can engage the executive more, so the executive knows how they're operating, and then also the mechanisms that can be used to give feedback to first year directors or people who are unsure of what they're doing in terms of if they're kind of floating, if they don't have any direction or are unsure of what they're doing on board, or also if someone has written a review or a policy or has done some project, giving them feedback on the quality of that project, how they could improve on their methods and their processes in doing that, so that going forward they everything that's done on board is a learning experience instead of kind of just learning as you go.
So a performance review kind of thing as well, or just like a feedback thing? Would it be like a rating system, or are you envisioning it?
It would be more a feedback thing. I don't think it is the place of any director to kind of be giving performance reviews of other directors, because everyone on board is always learning more, and it's more a development role than a kind of you are performing acceptably or you're not performing acceptably. I don't think that's the case in the board, so the executive should be having that role. It's kind of some more like, hey, here is some feedback, like specific feedback on what you did, here's how we can improve, and here's how we can improve together.
Are you suggesting therefore that you think that it's hard for non-executive board directors to have their voices heard amongst the executive?
It's not necessarily in terms of when we're making a decision. In terms of the feedback, it was kind of based out of my personal experience for when I first started on board after we'd been through induction and we'd been through our governance training. I felt like I was kind of a bit lost in terms of what I wanted to do and what projects I wanted to work on and how I wanted to implement change on the board outside of board meetings. And so I kind of felt really lost, and I didn't feel like I had the structures to be able to talk to the executive and be like, help me. Because there were cluster systems implemented at the start of last year which failed quite badly, and so I think we need
Can you clarify what a cluster system?
So a cluster was a member of the executive had 2 or 3 non-executive directors, and they were supposed to act as a guide and kind of be the point of contact.
A buddy system.
Like a buddy system is a good way to. But that didn't work, so I think that needs to be reassessed and how we can make it more structured.
Since you talked about a lot of this in the past tense, how do you have a plan to sort of get some of these ideas through in your second year if you're not actually on the executive? Have you thought about that at all?
I haven't thought about that.
So these kind of pipe dreams, or do you have do you have any way you think that you can agitate for these things to happen next year?
The only way, it would just be working whoever holds a position of vice president or honorary secretary, or whoever within the executive is deemed to be the more internal kind of organizer of the executive.
So regardless of whether or not you get the position, you'd like to kind of work to institute these reforms.
Yes.
Cool. So you were saying that that cluster system fails.
Yeah.
And kind of in light of that, what do you think about the performance of the current executive, including and specifically Hannah Morris?
I think this executive has performed quite well, given the circumstances that we've been under over the last year. I think Hannah has performed exceptionally in her position as president. There were moments, large periods of time over the last year when she kind of got left without an executive due to different things and different factors. And I think with that in light, she performed really well to keep the board together, to keep us working functionally, and to kind of lead the board in the organisation.
So, given some of the stuff you talked about, giving feedback to the board and stuff and things you'd want to do, can you name or detail some things you would have done differently to the current executive, or decisions or actions they've taken?
In hindsight, I would have liked to have seen the Tom Raue situation never occur, but I think everyone would have liked that, but I don't think that was something that was in anyone's hands to change. That would really be the only thing I would change.
Right, so more of a decision-making process rather than wishing for things not to have happened. So,
in terms
can you put a finger on a particular decision that the board made, or a particular issue in the way they handled it and said, I would have done that differently? Are you talking about Tom Raue in terms of you disagree with how the executive handled it, or you wish it hadn't happened at all?
I wish the whole thing hadn't happened at all.
Do you think the executive could have handled it better?
Not really. In that, I think if the executive were going to continue with their motion to remove Tom, they handled it in the best way possible. I think us being taken to court threw a spanner in that and caused everyone issues. But I think they followed process to as much as they could.
After making the decision to pursue the motion, though? Or are you saying that you agree with how they handled the procedure after deciding to pursue a motion to remove him?
Yes.
Or are you therefore saying that you don't necessarily agree with the decision to pursue a motion in the first place?
As in, I think we have our regulations, and I believe those regulations were being followed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that decision-making process was the right decision-making thing. The whole situation as a whole, I would not have liked to have seen occur. But that was not something that was in the role of the executive to make.
Okay, so going on from that, can you just talk us through how your decision-making process leading up to the Raue vote? How did you decide your vote?
So my decision was based on a couple of things. So first of all, it was based on what I thought to be the right interpretation of the constitution, not the constitution, of the regulations and our director's duties. And then I believe that Tom had breached those. And then on top of that, I also based that on how it would affect the relationship between us and the staff as a board, and then also the internal dynamics of the board as well.
Just following on from that as well, do you think there's a bit of a transparency deficit in the USU at the moment?
I do. I think I think we've always had a transparency issue. It's something that we as a board have actively worked on over the last year. I think it's something that it is something that I worked on quite specifically through the introduction of the in-camera policy. It's something that we are just working towards fixing.
What would you do specifically to fix it? Do you think that if you got VP, you would do anything specifically in order to address the ongoing transparency deficit?
So, it would only just be along the tracks of what we're already doing as a board. So we now have the in-camera policy. I would just continue to work to make sure we have our minutes are posted more regularly, more information about our decisions are posted more regularly. Also, the internal structures of the USU, how they're posted, and that information is accessible to ordinary members, because outside of someone who is really, really close to a board director or is on the board, it is really hard to find out about things like the working parties and what working parties do, which working party does what, how the working parties operate, how you can bring things to those working parties outside of a board context, things like that.
Okay.
Broad question, what do you see the role in the ambit of the USU to be?
It is really that's a tricky question to answer. I think everyone is going to answer that differently. To me, the USU is just going back to what it says in the Constitution. So it's a social and welfare of students on campus, and I think we do that through creating a top-notch student experience and making sure that we have welcoming and safe spaces on campus.
What do you think is part of that student experience?
What, sorry?
What do you think is part of that student experience? So you say they provide a student experience. What is that experience?
So that's like the experience outside of classes. So it's like club societies programs, our festivals, O Week Verge Festival, just the ability to follow the pursuits you're interested in, and in a like social context or more of like a cultural development, intellectual, or even welfare basis.
Okay. How do you feel about the politicization of board and sort of the movement towards the left in the last two elections in particular?
Okay, I don't necessarily see there's a movement towards the left. I think the board has always been a progressive body within the USU. In terms of the politicization, I don't think the USU should be a political organization whatsoever. I think that obviously people are going to come on board with like political ideas and like are generally very political people. That's the nature of student politics. That's how you get elected. What I would change that to the movement over the last couple of years has been a more increased dialogue about the ability of the USU to act as an activist organization, and I think that is not a bad thing. I think that can definitely coexist alongside our traditional activities like CNS and stuff. I think it is just important to keep that in mind, that we do that in a way that is not detrimental to the USU.
So in terms of stuff like when the USU Facebook page posted about the Sochi Olympics, is that something that you think is too political?
Within the ambit of the USU.
And is it too political?
I don't think that's too political. I think that it is well within the ambit of the USU.
To advocate on particular political causes? So where would you draw the line in terms of the USU advocating on political causes? Which
international relations. Yeah, it was.
Yeah, that's a pretty political statement to make.
As in, I just don't I don't think that USU should be physically doing things. I just don't think they should be closing down outlets in response to strikes and things like that. I think we're able to provide our members with information that affects our members in the way that Sochi does.
But if you're okay with a statement against Sochi, for example, how would you feel about unions saying that they weren't going to allow Max Brenner to set up on campus in support of BDS? Would that be the line that you wouldn't cross?
As in, if that was a decision of the board, then I think that is fine. The board already makes political decisions in that way, in that we have ethical coffee. We don't we have a sustainability policy, and I think that just falls under the remit of the sustainability policy, or and we're making moves for ethical investments. So yeah.
Okay.
What do you see as the ideal role of the staff and specifically the CEO in the running of the USU?
Well, I think it is just that they run the USU. So the staff, especially at the really higher level, bring to the organisation the experience and the knowledge of how to run a company our size. And I think their role is to just really implement the ideas that come from board.
So if they run the USU, what do board directors do?
Board directors do what board directors do, which is set the set the strategic vision and direction of the USU. So it is not up to the board to be worrying about the implementation of small specific operational things within the USU. It is for them to set the agenda and where the USU is going.
Okay, so when you run on specific policies get beers on campus, is that setting beers on the front lawn? Is that setting a big strategic vision, or is that a small minutia that you should have handed over to do you know what I mean? These policies that board directors run on seem to be quite specific to me and not so much strategic overview.
That's simply a failing in the understanding of what a board director does and what the board does.
Okay.
So can you name a policy from your 2013 election platform that fits that idea of a vision or direction for the board, rather than a specific policy that you get them to implement?
Okay, so one of the policies I ran on was greater representation from smaller faculties and from science-based faculties. That would be one of the more strategic vision ones, policies that I ran on. I am more than happy to admit that when I ran for board, I didn't have the proper understanding of what the board does. Since getting elected to board and through the training I did get that. I now have that understanding, and so that's changed.
Okay.
We'll come back to policies.
Yeah, we'll come back later.
Yeah.
So, still on topic of staff, what is your experience being with staff and the CEO of the USU? Do you feel like they do have maybe a little bit too much control in some areas?
My 99% of my interactions with staff have been positive. I think the staff are just as passionate, if not more passionate, about the USU than we as directors are. A lot of them have been here for a long time, and they wouldn't hang around if they weren't super passionate about what we do. I think in terms of whether or not the staff have too much control, I think it comes down to a idea of what the board is supposed to do, and whether or not the board wants to be a more hands-on board, or if they just want to be a more visionary board. And that kind of it's kind of the board coming to terms with whether, which side of that they want to be on. That causes some tension with the staff, but I don't think the staff have too much control.
What's that 1%?
That 1%
of negative interactions you've had.
So it's just been situations in some board meetings where staff have made offhanded comments that need to be kind of brought back into line.
What do you mean by offhanded comment that needs to be brought into line?
Oh, just it's kind of just whether or not a staff member has thought that that they can talk kind of more relaxed in a board setting, or kind of not.
Right, so procedural stuff, right?
Yeah, it's procedural stuff. Yeah.
So not really staff members stepping over what you think to be their bounds of power or something.
No.
Okay.
In the upcoming executive elections, will you be seeking the vote of Senate appointed directors?
Not actively. In that, I think while the Senate appointed directors are members of the board members, I think that they should be presented with all of the information available about a decision that they may make or a decision that may affect them. I will provide that information to them, but I will not specifically ask them to vote for me.
And so you've never sought or courted, sought the vote of a Senate appointed director or courted one for their vote?
No.
Would that influence your decision on who to vote for?
No.
On board? Even if someone is actively seeking those votes?
No. As board directors, we have the ability to talk to every single person who is on board, whether or not they're elected, and I don't think that one person's decision to talk to someone about how they're going to vote, to me, that doesn't detract on how good they would be on the executive.
Alright. So, which of the other board directors do you feel you'd best be able to serve on an exec with if you were to serve on the exec?
Tim Matthews. Over the last year, Tim and I have worked quite closely on the board, and I feel like I get along really well with him in both a professional and a personal social level. I would also like to work with Bibi. I think Bibi and I come to ideas from different perspectives, and we kind of do have a bit of disagreement a lot of the time, but we always seem, or in my opinion, we always seem to come to the best outcome because of that, and I think that would be really good in executive, and then also Tara.
Have you made deals with any of those directors?
No.
Have you had discussions with them about the executive elections at all? Have you had chats about whose vote goes where?
I have, but I've also had the exact same conversations with people who aren't on board.
Fair enough.
Okay. So, as we saw at the AGM this morning, the USU has moved to remove all references to the word union in the Constitution, and it's now using USU exclusively to refer to itself. What do you think about the role of student unionism in the USU? And do you think that this name change signifies anything?
I don't think it signifies anything at all. I think changing the word union to USU is just a reflection of what our name actually is, which is the University of Sydney Union. And it's just the same as if we were to say throughout the Constitution, the University of Sydney Union, or USU is exactly the same. I don't think that changing the words is an issue at all.
Because some posited that it's kind of signifying a move away from what the traditional conception of a union, i.e. fighting for rights of students in this case, and you don't think it signifies anything like that at all.
I don't think that's an issue at all. I think John Hutchinson made a really good point today at the AGM in which he said, the CFMEU doesn't specifically say the word union in their documents. That's the same as the NTU or the CPSU, but they are still considered to be just as legitimately a union, even though they don't use the word specifically union in their formal documents.
So, quickly back to Senate appointed directors. Based on the AGM, Emma has attended 6 of 11 meetings, and Simone has attended 2 of 4. How can they sort of be across issues pertaining to board when their attendance is far below that of student directors? Like, you've attended 6 of 6 according to the report. Their attendance is so below everyone else's. How can they possibly be informed enough to vote on something like the executive election?
Just because you don't attend a board meeting doesn't mean that Emma and Simone have failed to read all of the readings beforehand, or have actively sought out the information of the organisation.
But they have spent less face-to-face time with the people that are actually going to be on that executive and they might be voting for.
I still don't think that that's a matter.
So you don't think their vote is not even slightly less informed than that of a student board director who's been to every single meeting?
I think that is obviously more informed through the nature of working with those directors, but as they are directors, I think that they should be as informed as possible when they make their decisions that they're allowed to make.
During the special meeting concerning Tom Raue, you suggested that board directors not in favour of his removal should contribute their stipends to the costs incurred by the USU. Do you still think that's the case, and would you pursue this as a concrete objective should he be elected to the executive?
So what I said in the SGM is that directors who are involved in a legal action, who agreed on pursuing that legal action a number of times, and then switched at a time that I thought was the last minute, I think that those directors should refund their stipend.
Yeah, but that's everyone but BB though.
Yeah.
So do you think you'd pursue that as an objective?
Yep.
So is that on your policy platform for VP?
For
VP?
It's not obviously on my policy platform, but it's something that it's a statement I made then. It's not a statement that I'm going to change my mind on.
Right. Also during that meeting, you said that, and you've touched on that already, that some board directors changed their positions at the last minute, and you suggested that it was in preparation for the executive election itself, political posturing. Which directors do you feel made that political change of position?
Well, I think it's pretty obvious from the directors who voted against the motion and weren't Tom or BB.
Okay. So, would you refuse to vote for any of those directors for a position based on that?
I wouldn't refuse to vote for them. I think it goes a long way to show what factors into their decision-making processes on things that are big issues, and I think that is something that I would keep in mind if I was deciding between one of those directors and another one, or between those two directors, because I think one of the most important things to look at for executives, especially for president, is how the directors come to their decisions and what factors will influence that decision.
Right. So earlier you said that you could see yourself serving on an executive with Tara.
Yeah.
She did change her position she was one of the people who voted to keep Tom, but was part of the legal action. Why? How? In other words, how strongly do you feel about this? That you'd still see yourself working well with Tara on an executive, even though that you've got such serious concerns about how people came to that decision? Because it's a pretty big decision, and if you think that it was a politically motivated decision, that's kind of a big indictment of a board director. Yeah.
So it's just I'm happy to work with these people. I would like to work with these people on executive. It's just the different roles on which they would play.
Right. You said when you were running for board that you'd push hard for attention to be brought to satellite campuses, and you specifically said you wanted to introduce access discounts to all satellite campuses. Can you detail some of the efforts you've made towards doing this thus far on board?
Yeah. So what I've worked with the staff about access discounts at ATP in Redfern.
Okay. Are there now access discounts?
There are now access discounts there.
So plans to expand it to the other ones?
I have moved my focus on board to other areas.
Why is that?
Just where I fell into on board with the working parties. So now I have a very strong focus on the commercial operations and the governance aspects of the USU.
Isn't this part of commercial operations? Sure.
No, it's more focused on like CCE. I'd put it under like the more co-curricular experience area.
So do you think it's okay to just kind of like abandon an election promise halfway through your term because you found it interesting in another area?
Like, I think people change when you like. Ultimately, your view on what the the areas you're interested in the organization change when you get more information out there.
So your decision to run on that was kind of like ill-informed, is what you're saying, because you kind of alluded to that earlier in the interview. Sorry, tonight you said that it was you've kind of learned a lot since you were running. Yeah,
and I have, and I think it was one of the aspects I ran on. So I think that people will chop and change, no matter what they run on.
What do you think is wrong with that policy now? So you sort of said your views have changed.
My views haven't changed. My focuses have changed.
Right. So you still think the policy is a good one. You just don't think it should be a priority. Is that it?
No, I think it should be a priority for the entire board, but it's just not one of my priorities.
Okay.
So similarly, what about beers on the front lawns? Callum runs Old Mate Wine Sock, and he's got licensing on individual areas. You're on board, and you haven't fulfilled that campaign promise. Why is that?
That's mainly because we have looked at increased use of our campus space and using events or using our campus space for more events. Currently, there's a proposal before the Commercial Operations Working Party to have an event around Eastern Avenue that can incorporate that. Just because there hasn't been a specific event on the front lawns, doesn't mean that the focus of that concept has disappeared.
Okay, but you still haven't fulfilled it. So similarly with the access on all campuses, would you classify this as another campaign promise that you haven't fulfilled, or would you say it's still in motion or in?
It's still in motion.
Okay.
What about efforts towards the introduction of associate board directors?
Associate board directors. Well, we're currently in the process of reviewing our governance structures through GWP, and so that's going to factor into that.
So will you be pushing for, because it's another thing you ran on obviously, which you know, will you in that review, will you be pushing for the introduction of associate board directors? Because this was part of the thing to get more science students and students from not arts essentially.
So I am pushing for that. We are also looking at the way we interact with our Senate appointed directors, and so that is also factoring into that discussion that's being had at the moment.
And one of the other things you said was in terms of the science students and the small faculty students. You said that you wanted to reduce the duration of the election. What have you done in terms of not just implementing that, but making the union and board more accessible to those small faculty students?
So there have been discussions around that in terms of the electoral committee.
So you proposed to reduce the election period?
I didn't, but there have been discussions around it.
Okay, how come you didn't push to reduce the election period?
Because I don't sit on the electoral committee.
Okay.
So kind of from where we're sitting, you can see where we're going with this. I think my question is, you running for VP is essentially you putting yourself up for promotion on what is a corporate board. If you haven't thus far really concretely fulfilled any of your campaign promises that we can tell, why do you then deserve to go on and get a promotion, which I think you would agree would automatically broaden your focus and mean that those policies would almost definitely not get fulfilled? Why do you deserve this?
Well, I'm not running for an exec position.
But you said
you might run for VP.
If you could, you run for VP.
No, I said I considered running for VP.
But if you're considering running for VP, you obviously feel that in some ways you deserve a promotion.
So the reason I would getting the promotion is because I think I have the best capacity to facilitate what I think needs to be done through the position of VP. And I think that is that ability and that capacity as a director is removed from whether or not you've fulfilled your campaign promises, because there's there's the ability to understand there's the ability to run on policies that you think are that through your limited knowledge of how the board operates as a non-director. Once you become a director, that ability then that understanding of how you can implement things changes.
Isn't that sort of a crux or an excuse you can come to with the exec as well, where you say, well, now I'm VP, but now that I'm in the executive, I suddenly see that things are very different, and the things that I wanted to do as an exec aren't actually achievable or should be priorities. Like the issue is if you haven't completed any of your election promises from when you were a candidate running for board, how do people know that you'd meet your promises running for the executive?
It kind of sounds like a get out of jail free card.
Yeah.
Kind of like you learn more and so your promises evolve.
Yeah, like I think there is a clear distinction between going from someone who is not on board to being a director. I think that difference is a lot bigger than someone who goes from a non-executive director to an executive director, in that you've worked very, like as a normal director over the last year, you work very closely with the executive and you see what they do and how they operate. And you also have that ability to have a conversation with them and see what they don't, like what they do and what they don't do, and then find out very easily about what you don't know.
So, since you've said that your sort of priorities changed around being on board, what would you point to as like the one biggest achievement you've made or had in your 1 year so far?
So I probably point to two things. So first of all would be the in-camera policy that I wrote and is being implemented now. So I did that through GWP. Kind of going from like nothing to having like a clear structure through which we classify what we're going to in-camera for I think is a big step in the like right direction for transparency. The other thing that I consider to be like a semi-achievement is the commemoration day. Or the Commemoration Day Working Party, which I sat on for a good 6 months, in which we developed a concept for a Commemoration Day party on the front lawns, which got right through to the fact that we had it all finished. We had site meetings, and then it got halted in CIS. And then the third thing would also be the reform of the Commercial Operations Working Party, which we're currently working on.
So reform. Sorry, what do you mean? Just clarify what you mean by reform.
Okay, so we're currently in the process of changing how the working party operates to make it more effective and more applicable to how we operate it, like how the standard student directors can get involved in that and help influence decisions at a more operational level.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's all we got.
Okay.
Cheers. Thank you for your time.
No problem.
Thanks, Kade.